Thanks, Karen, for joining me today. To kick us off, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure, Karen. My name is Karen. I graduated recently from UC Berkeley with a degree in data science. And my journey through college has been quite, I would say, like non-linear. I started off as a chemical engineering major, kind of like didn't know what to do, like post college. And I could see that a lot of my friends like were in either like in working towards the industry track or like pre-doctoral. I think like that's mostly like the pathway that a lot of chemical engineers take through college. And I think my kind of like journey to college has really like defined like a lot of my like long-term interests now, like in terms of my career. I think one of the pivots was joining an entrepreneurship club on campus called Sigma Eta Pi. Um, yeah, just through my exposure at the club there, I was like exposed to like everything entrepreneurship, startup related. Um, and yeah, from that, like got introduced to a couple people in the space and the network, managed to join Rough Draft Ventures, which is a kind of like student arm of General Catalyst. So we invest like up to 150K in college founders throughout the country. I don't know if that check size has increased. And now I'm working full time at Google.
Awesome overview. And I think you were at Rough Draft Ventures for a little over a year. Is that correct? I think from November 2021 to December 2022.
Yep. Been there for over a year. I'm still in touch with a couple of fellows from my cohort. So it's a really great opportunity to just meet people who are interested in the startup space.
Yeah, cool. And how did you first hear about Rough Draft Ventures on campus?
Yeah, I think so. I could kind of trace that back to maybe like my first like summer internship in college where I lived with a bunch of other people, sort of like in a hacker house, if you will. It's called Edify. They eventually got acquired by Contrary, but I met a lot of people who were partners in other like student funds, like dorm room fund. And so that's kind of how I like got acquainted with like the student VC space. And I think with Rough Draft, I just like happened to apply, like I didn't necessarily know anyone in the fund, but that's how I got introduced to the concept of student VCs in general. One tip that I have for people who are interested in joining is to make sure that you have like a clear why, and also like, try networking by yourself, like through LinkedIn or Twitter. Having a Twitter presence really helps. So yeah, like I didn't really know anyone who was in it. I knew people who were like in other funds, but that's kind of just how it happened.
Makes sense. Can you give an overview of that application process?
Yeah, so I remember for me, for Rough Draft, it was like they had a few questions like tell us about a time, like, behavioral questions about like why you're interested in the student startup space, like why, how you would like provide value to like founders, like if you had a friend who you wanted to invest in, who would it be, what are they working on, kind of just like to gauge like your commitment to the like entrepreneurship scene on campus. And then following that, I think I had a couple chats with Jeremy, who's leading Rough Draft from GC side internally, and then with a couple of their other investors and principals. So I would say, it's a little informal. Like sometimes like it'll be like a series of like 3 to 4 different chats, sometimes with a current Rough Draft fellow, sometimes with someone from the GC side or General Catalyst. But yeah, it was definitely like enlightening for me personally. And it shouldn't be like too complicated. It's just very competitive, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier, like your tip for students is to like understand like your why. I guess like what was your why going into that organization?
Yeah, I think for me it was like I had started sort of like co-founded like a company with one of my friends, so I knew like the pains of like having being a student founder, like having to find sources of funding on campus. Like Cal is one of like kind of like an ex sorry, a kind of like an external, or it's different in a way, just because we have like so many like um support systems on campus. Like, there's like Cal specific funds, there's like the Citrus Institute. But I'm assuming like if you're coming from, university that doesn't have as much resources, like it's much more difficult for you to like tap into that like ecosystem. So I think that's one part. I think second is just I really just wanted to like engage myself in the kind of like entrepreneurship ecosystem more deeply and like establish like my connections with other people nationwide. Since if you go to Cal, sometimes like you just get like that specific mindset of like being in the Bay Area. But I wanted to just expose myself to other like kind of ideas and perspectives from other people across the country as well. So I think that was like one special part about Rough Draft is we have like 15 or ish, I don't know what the size of the cohort is now, people from like literally across the world, across the country, but also they're like some of them are international, you know, they have a lot of like fresh perspectives. I really appreciated that.
Cool. And then like once you got into Rough Draft Ventures, I guess like what happens next? Is there some sort of like onboarding process or training process before you actually work with founders, or how does that work?
Yeah, so it we do have like a kind of kickoff sort of offsite. I think it's like for 1 to 2 days, usually in Boston, where we bring together the entire cohort and we establish like our kind of like SOP or like standard operating procedure. Like, what do we look for in founders? Like, we establish like our how to formulate like our own investment theses and hypotheses. Kind of also like our investing philosophy. Like I think it varies very differently from person to person. Like you'll find that a lot, right? Like no two investors invest the same manner, but it's more so like how do you articulate like what the whys of investing, why this person, why this company. We talked about like some previous investments that succeeded for Rough Draft specifically, what worked, how they sourced the deal, how they like carried that on to like pitching the founder to the rest of the cohort and so on and so forth. So I think yeah, like there is like a side of like formal training, and then as the cohort progresses, like you do have to have the opportunity to source your own investments and present them to the investment committee.
Cool. And you mentioned no two investors maybe has like they're maybe not looking for the exact same things, but I imagine there's some sort of like shared commonalities of like qualities or traits they're looking for in founders or companies. Can you talk
Mm-hmm.
more about, I guess, just like what Rough Draft Ventures looks for in student founders broadly?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. Like sometimes it's the founder, sometimes it's the idea, sometimes it's the market. But I think we always try to be founder first. More so like we look for founders who demonstrate grit, who demonstrate a passion for the space that they're working in. The why is incredibly important. And to draw from like my own personal experiences, I personally sourced and led investment in Advisorly. They're kind of like a platform that connects like people in community colleges to like four-year universities. And I think that's something that really struck the entire investment committee when we were talking about that company, and also Manny, the founder, was that you can really just tell like when a person like demonstrates passion because they've been working on this problem for years. Like it's not just like, you know, a semester like, oh, I'll start this company for fun. And sometimes we do get that, but like does it demonstrate like in, you know, the way they talk about it and how they spend their time outside of like school and outside of work. So I think that's definitely like a key kind of point that we try to like discern whenever we invest in founders is like the why, and the why this problem. That's really, really important.
Cool. And then I was also curious about just like the investment process. I guess like what needs to happen for a deal to like actually get done. It sounds like there's some sort of like pitch in front of a committee. Yeah. What's the, I guess, like process for that?
Yeah, so it's mostly like we have geographic pods. So nationwide, like we have Boston, California, or West Coast. Um, I think I'm not sure, but we also have like a separate um, like I'm not like 100% sure what like the splits are, but we try to like keep it like to a team of 3 or 4 people per pod. And we usually just like discuss deals before like bringing it on like to the nationwide like committee. So sometimes what we do is we say I source like a company from Berkeley and I want someone else to like kind of just double check or like get a second opinion of whether or not we should like bring it up. Usually like we try to like progressively filter to make sure that, oh, okay, like, do we think that this company is mature enough for us to bring to committee? After that initial process, we do have them like speak in front of like all 15 or 20 of us. And then we do vote sometimes like, but we have to like drive majority consensus. But I'm not sure if that's still the same right now. I think it's just like people in the pod, or like four people vote on it or against it. And then we bring it up further to GC. But usually whatever we approve, GC invests, unless it's like competing with like an internal portfolio company. Yeah, that's mostly how I would say the investment process is.
Makes sense. And then what stage are the startups that you guys are working with? Like, do most companies have like a product? Do they have some traction? I guess like where along the spectrum are they?
Yeah, I think at least like an MVP. I think that's just important for us to like be able to make sure that you have the ability to execute as a founder, you know. Sometimes we do get like kind of like more mature companies like come our way, like, you know, companies with like double digit ARR. So yeah, like I think I would say it varies. Sometimes like we invest early if we think we have really strong conviction in the founder. Sometimes we invest a little later if there's already kind of like demonstrated success in the company. It does vary, but usually at the seed stage
Gotcha.
max. Yeah.
And then what would you say is like Rough Draft Ventures value add to startups in the portfolio?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think first and foremost, we help a lot with hiring, especially with like interns. We have like referrals to potential employees like within our network. We have kind of like an external like Slack platform that has all our founders and like former RDV fellows. And if like a job opportunity comes like the network's way, we will share it like to other people that we might think might be a good fit or interested. I think that another like clear like value add is generally the access to like GC investors and like people who have like talked to and worked with like founders who have demonstrated like repeated success. I think that's like really rare. And also like, yeah, it generally sometimes like we do have like GC follow on to like investments to RDV companies, depending on like, you know, later stage of success. But I think that kind of like initial support really helps. And yeah, like I would say like we do have an internal platform that also provides like stuff like AWS credits, discounts for other like SaaS companies that are in the GC like portfolio. RDV does help with that. So we try to like provide tangible value add apart from, you know, the safes to our founders.
Cool. And then you talked a little bit about just like your collaboration with like other student partners at different campuses. It seems like you guys work pretty closely together on specific deals. Kind of curious about the General Catalyst side. You mentioned, I think Jeremy is like the internal person running point on Rough Draft Ventures. Is it mostly just interfacing with him, or how do you work with the broader General Catalyst team?
Yeah, so sometimes we will host events like hackathons or kind of like pitch competitions, and then we have some of the GC folks come in and actually like evaluate the deals. And we have successfully invested not just like checks from Rough Draft, but from GC, like one of GC's funds into like these companies. I'm not entirely sure if that's the case still, but anytime like we have a deal that we feel like is strong enough to pass on to GC, we'll tap other people as well. We try to get expertise from people, you know, have who understand the gaming industry better, or for example, crypto or healthcare, which is honestly like one of GC's strengths. So yeah, we do get to interface with them a lot, especially with just like trying to get like third, fourth opinions on a deal.
Cool. And then kind of curious, like what advice would you give to a student founder who's pitching Rough Draft Ventures and trying to get funding? Like how do they stand out during that process?
I would say earnestness is underrated. That's personally, it's what I look for. Like how earnest, how serious is this problem to you? I would say also like I don't think we filter too much on like prior success, like, oh, like this person has like like a impressive internship on their resume. It's more so like, do we think that they can execute? Have they shown like repeated history of execution and success in like, you know, smaller projects or smaller companies that they've started before? I think like being a repeat entrepreneur is underrated, but we love that. We love seeing that in the investment committee. Um, I would say, yeah, like how do how do you stand out is kind of like a there's a lot of things that it encompasses, but I think every founder truly has something special that they bring to the table. I remember a lot of the conversations that I have with every founder, and in some way or another, they've like stood out to me because I gleaned something important from what they were saying, and they were able to like convey that. So storytelling, I think, is also incredibly important.
Cool. And then last question, is there like anything I didn't ask about that you think is important to know for someone considering wanting to be like an investor with Rough Draft Ventures, or someone who's looking for funding from Rough Draft Ventures?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, Rough Draft Ventures is just but one kind of like player in the ecosystem. I would say that if you really are interested in entrepreneurship and startups, like you you kind of don't have to look. You will find yourself in these places naturally. I would say that for kind of like people who don't have as much access to it, maybe by nature of like, you know, who they are or like where they go to school, maybe they're not as well resourced. I would say that it is unfortunate that like, you know, there are kind of like hidden, I would say like hidden ways to like go about like the whole like startup ecosystem, but just try putting yourself out there as much as possible. Like, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to send that like LinkedIn connection to that person. Your sincerity and your excitement will really show. And I think that's one thing that will set you apart from, you know, a lot of people. Because I felt like I didn't have like a traditional background coming in. Like I wasn't a CS major. I did grow up here in the States, but if you do your research, if you do your due diligence, like it'll show.
Yeah. Cool. I love that
Yeah.
advice. Thanks, Karen, for joining me today.
Of course. Yeah. Happy to help.